I'm so used to this, I didn't even pay attention to it.
That light is supposed to be green.
Oh, now it's,
Yeah, but that one should be green.
yeah, it should be.
It was green when I put it on. Does that mean it's dying?
But I had it plugged in this whole time.
Because
Me-
Bluetooth's on and the
Yeah,
volume's on, so that must mean battery.
must be. I didn't ring the cord up either. Oh, well, technical difficulties. The emotion of crying. If someone's crying in front of you, unless you're, yeah, unless you're really a cold-hearted person, what's the emotion that you will instantly feel?
Empathy or sympathy.
Right, you'll instantly have that empathy or sympathy to them. What's another emotion? A nonverbal cue that you can react to right away, that you instantly know the feeling. Laughing. And sometimes laughing is a nervous laughing, but sometimes it's also a laughing in reaction to something funny. What's some other emotions that could cause you to feel uncomfortable or angry?
Rolling of the eyes.
Right. Teachers absolutely love those. There are many students, because what is that a nonverbal cue meaning?
That they just don't care, that they're
Yes. Yeah, it's that sarcasm, I don't care, you don't bother me, I don't, you know. Moms say that, and I hate to say it, but females a lot of time, that's how they communicate, with the rolling of the eyes, disgust, and what other nonverbal cues? Think about it. I think we take a lot of those nonverbal cues for granted because they happen around us so much. How about like the shaking of the head, or, right? Think of those things that happen around you on a daily basis. I want you to become more observant this week. Pay attention to the nonverbal cues and the communication around you. Think when you're out in public. Think when you're in groups socially. Kind of do a observation. And think about what that portrays and meaning to everybody around socially. And now let's come back to the language in the classroom. You're going to have a diversity of languages, a diversity of cultures, and a diversity of environment that students are brought up with. So the cues that you may be using in the classroom, the language that you may be using, is not what they're familiar with. So what do you need to know as a teacher in your classroom? Pardon me?
You need to know their body language.
You need to know their body language, you need to know their environment, their culture background, because don't forget, when students come here, even from other countries, there's a different communication of language, even male, female, in many different cultures. The respect or the male culture in certain cultures don't respect females. Females react differently in classrooms, and males react differently in classrooms with females. So you have to pay attention to that in that diversity. And so there is a, in the case book, what would you do in the classroom? And it's cultures class. Take a look at that page 170, the first page of chapter 5. And again, it's a high school scenario. Read that through and think, pair, share through the questions about the problem there. Talk to your partner. What would you do in that scenario? And if you've had experience in those scenarios, talk about your experiences with it. But as a teacher, what would you do? And what is the problem there?
Right. I think the real problem is that they just misunderstand each other.
Jamila, do you want to, Brianna and Jamila, or Maya, do you want?
I just remember
Based on like my own.
Biggest strategy is like create the groups without saying you, right, like, or like counting or colors.
all they care about is as long as they do the work that they don't care if something matters with culture. Yeah.
I don't know what I would say. I think I would just like as you go up in the grade level, so it's gonna get worse and worse because
Like,
it's gonna be. But if you teach
They
them,
count on, because I know that that's what they would do.
That happens in all my classes. People count on. Yeah, but what happens like when like they have to see
Okay. Great job. Andrea. No, she's not here. Megan.
We said that we would put them into groups, like by using the sticks or counting off by numbers so that they got mixed together. And maybe doing a cultural assignment where they all talk about their own cultures, create awareness.
Good. First step of becoming more aware of each other and understanding each other. Good. Good strategy. Alicia.
These are just the same thing, like just try to really divide the groups so there's someone from each group together.
Okay. Perfect. Samantha. T. Yep. You have the same.
Yeah, we said
Okay.
the same thing.
Heather.
Yep.
Same group. Yeah. Never mind. We took them out. Caitlin.
Basically said the same thing, but also to understand them more, like them as a culture, realizing that they all come from different places.
Did it say the cultural background of the teacher?
no.
Do you think that that would be important to know? Shmaya.
Pretty much same thing everybody else is saying, but we're like they have to find something in each other that they have in common to know that they'll be able to integrate.
And understand each other? Excellent. Okay. Jamie.
It kind of said like the same thing, like maybe like every week they can find like a different person that they didn't know and kind of show and tell them like this is my friend, so and so they're from wherever, and something about them and something that they have in common.
Perfect. Have you ever done those activities? What's that called?
Aren't they like icebreakers?
Icebreakers, right, where you have to, you sit with someone that you have not sat with before, and you do like a little interview with them to find out all about themselves, and then it's your role to share about your partner shares about you. So what important information did you just find out about your partner? And that's a great way as a teacher to kind of, again, as an icebreaker, to bring people together and get them to talk to others that they've never talked to before. Danielle. She's not. Erin, you did, yeah.
But like the one thing we talked about too is how like with the teacher she has to build like a personal relationship with like the students and get to know them and like
Well-
build like trust.
What was the key here that teacher kind of said? What was the,
language, she thinks that they're automatically talking about her because she doesn't
Right.
understand them.
Right.
Also that she's having trouble to establish positive relationships within the students that's in her classroom.
So, whose difficulty is that, Shemaya?
It's hers, it's also the others, because the teacher also says, like, as people pick up on her discomfort about them, they shy away too.
Right. Again, this goes back to body language. If it's nonverbal communication, and if you instantly walk away from someone, or turn away, or back away, what does that say to them?
You don't want me near them.
Right, right. So they're not building a trust with the teacher because the teacher is showing a fear. I don't think that the teacher's not saying, you know, I dislike my class. It's a fear that the teacher has because the teacher is in the unknown. So what does the teacher need to do? If the teacher is fearful in the classroom, what do you think the atmosphere is going to be? Yes. So do you think the teacher's body language is also contributing to this tenseness among the groups in the classroom? Jackie, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, like, you have to just learn about your students.
Right. You have to worry about how they're feeling in the environment in the classroom. So the crux of the problem here is that more of the distrust and the fear that's happening. Let me see, I think the last group that did it is Paige.
Everybody else basically said our answer, but we said like choose the groups so that there's no
Creates a right. And I think the key here too is because they're all speaking different languages, and they probably are distrustful because they're not communicating well amongst each other. If the teacher is only doing all the instruction in English, and she doesn't understand all the other language and cultures, the teacher doesn't have to necessarily learn all the different languages, but she needs to communicate in a way so that their language is also transferred with English. So dual instruction, finding things with, I had friends that adopted three teenagers, brothers, sisters, from Bogota last year. Now here they are, one was in 4th grade, one was in 7th grade, and one was in 8th grade. Now can you imagine, and these 3 children lived in foster care or an orphanage all their life. And they were never in structured environment educationally. So their education stopped somewhere around, the little one was still in school, but the other 2 stopped somewhere around 3rd, 4th grade. So here they come to the United States, assimilating to a new culture, a new family, and put into our public school environment without all this background. And they didn't speak English at all. So think about the hurdles of those 3, and I actually went with the parents to help them bridge, some of the communication. The parents are from here, they're English speaking, but they didn't know what to ask or what they should expect from the school to do. Now, it depended on the teacher, because middle school is such a tough schedule for kids. Some of the teachers were extremely accommodating and said, we'll do whatever we need to do. We'll translate, the information for them. We'll get the core subject content down for them, in their language. And there's only one ESL teacher in the district. So he could only spend, when an ESL student comes into a new district, they have to assess them and see the level that they're on, a tier 1, 2, or 3, and what they need. Well, they were the most intense. So they needed at least an hour to 2 hours a day instruction in their language to help them with assimilating with it. Well, he didn't even have that time to do that. And you don't, as a classroom teacher, have an ESL teacher with you at all times in the classroom. So it was very difficult. Now, some of the teachers were extremely gracious with them and really helped and spent time with them and really got to know the kids. And the one was struggling. I mean, she had a teacher that, basically it was a math teacher, and she says, basically, this is what you need to learn. Well, they didn't even have the basis of math. So it was really, really difficult transition for them. They're doing a little bit better this year because they've assimilated more. They like, they have a group of friends now, and that's helping. And don't forget, peer communication and language and culture helps students with communication. Anything that's peer taught will help the students. So by pairing them up and putting them in groups, that will help with the communication. So that's why we're going into the diversity of the many languages. Now, I would like you to look at 173, and we're going to talk about how language actually develops and looking at the ranges. We talked about that cognitively, how our brain changes from birth all the way to where you are now in adulthood and further. So think about the milestones here in language and think back in your life. Some of you may not remember the influences, some of you do, clearly. But think about the ages between 2 and 3. What is there in your environment that helps perpetrate that language development? Understanding what objects are called, knowing what to ask for, even learning the language to communicate with your families. Sam?
Your parents speak and teaching you.
And what's usually around 2 or 3-year-olds, even earlier too?
Toys that talk to you.
Now they are. I mean, back when I was growing up, we didn't have all the sorry, in the open. We didn't have, all the toys that talk to you and the communication. So where do you think a lot of that communication came from? The family. And if you have a family who basically is pretty much nonverbal, that do not communicate well, talk to each other, that's that whole point that you hear all the time about what we're lacking now is there's no dinner time discussions. Families don't eat together. It's not the matter of eating food together. What do you think the purpose for that was? Is to talk, communicate, find out how your day was. So what has happened over time now that has taken away that kind of family time? Technology. So what's happening now?
I don't know, kids prefer to watch TV, so they sit on the sofa.
Mhm.
And parents, they want to sit at the dining table, so there's two different.
Exactly. So the communication, what's happening?
It's
Are they communicating through technology? What's the form of communication that's happening now with most kids? Texting. What else? Social media. Snapchat. What kind of communication is that? It's nonverbal, and think of the language that's used in texting. Snapchat. Right. It's acronyms. It's shortened. They're not true language words. So think of kids learning how to speak in sentences. Think how that's different now. They don't speak in sentences anymore. What happens?
They abbreviate everything.
Everything's abbreviated, or one word, or symbols. How many times are you out talking with your friends and they use the abbreviation for texting while they're speaking?
I try not to.
You try not to, but what are the abbreviations that?
BRB.
Yeah. Yeah. LOL. And you hear it, and people that have not grown up in this technology, they're left out of that language. It's a language barrier, isn't it? They're like, what are you talking about? What does that mean, right? And symbols are coming up and acronyms are coming up every day. So our communication barriers have been built. So you as teachers have to look at that differently and say, there's academic language that we must use in school. Whatever you use outside of school socially, we're going to leave that outside of school. Here, we need to use rich academic language for communication, and you model it. You are the teacher that models this behavior so that they pick it up. So let's look at the milestone for our 2 and 3-year-old. You see this at homes, you see families, and most 2 and 3-year-olds still are hooked into the media or TV with Sesame Street and other early childhood, which is sometimes detrimental. I don't know if you saw that Fisher-Price came out last year with an iPad attached to the early child rocker, it was an infant kind of thing. And the iPad was attached. And they would just hook up the iPad and have the child actually in the baby sling watching the iPad. It caused huge amount of controversy. I don't even know if they took it off the market because there was a test on it. Did you remember? Is it still on the market? We should do a search and find out. Why do you think people were up in arms about it? Absolutely. Yes. Think of the early cognitive activity of the brains. Eye muscles are still building at that time. You don't have that solid integration yet down in the brain, and then you're going to have this iPad with flashing colors and sounds and in front of the infant's eyes and face. So it's not good for early development. That's why they put all kinds of colorful things in front of the babies and activities for them to grab, because they're trying to build those fine motor, gross motor skills, the communication. So think about that. That's where they're identifying body parts. Their pronoun is me. It's all about, remember the cognitive, it's all about them, the sign, so they know the word me instead of their name. At that point, they have 450 word vocabulary and short sentences, like gimme, or they say water, or they say milk, or they come up with other words that mean that. So it's not full communication. But the key to that early development is reading lots of text and books. And so yes, technology is wonderful, but nothing replaces the reading time for parents with books with kids, because that's where they pick up most of their language and their skills at that time. So if you look over at the strategies to encourage that development, you know when kids scream out or cry? You see the temper tantrums happening, young children, yeah. And what's the reaction to parents? Especially if it's in the store, the kid's screaming. They try to quiet them down, and they usually take them out of the store or remove them. But think about it, kids at that age, yeah, I mean some are older and they're doing that, that's not true. But usually at that age, they can't communicate what they want. And their frustration comes out in, yes, screaming and noise making and pointing. And then parents get frustrated, right? So the key is that parents need to have that communication with them to teach them what the words are of what they want. Don't give them symbol words, or don't call it something else. You know how many parents would teach baby talk? You don't want to teach them baby talk. You want to teach them the actual word of what it is that they want. So when they want that bottle, you say, oh, you need your bottle, you're thirsty, and you use those words to promote the language development. So let's skip on further to 3 and 4. At that stage, there's so much going on around them that they can start to already tell a story. At that stage, it's like when someone comes over, they're telling everything that happened in the house. That's when parents are like, whoa, that's when parents are afraid, those kids that are going to preschool, they're telling everything that happens at home, because they're in that stage that they're telling stories. They don't see this as, I'm telling things outside of our house that maybe mommy doesn't want. But they're the kids that listen well. They'll hear everything. Mom's on the phone and she might be saying some awful things, and what happens? All of a sudden the kids start using it, right? That's where they pick up the language. They don't know. They don't know that's something they shouldn't repeat. Then between 4 and 5, that's where their sentence lengthen. And look at the amount of words and vocabulary they have. 1,500 words. It's remarkable that they're little brains. And there was no structured instruction. Nobody sat them down and did flashcards. How did they learn their language?
Observing and
Listening,
listening.
observing, sensory, TV, noise. Driving in the car, you're talking to them. It's constant language, the communication. And then between 4 and 5, 10,000 words. So they're starting kindergarten with at least 10,000 words. Now think of a household or an environment that the kids are coming from another culture, a different language, a nonverbal household, and you as the kindergarten teacher are instructing with all this language and reading, and these are kids that don't have any of this language. Think how hard that is. Now transfer it to adolescence. If adolescents continue on through their life and they decrease their language vocabulary, think of how difficult that is to teach your content to adolescents. So what can you do as adolescent teachers? Thinking about vocabulary, thinking about language. Because think about, adolescents go through that stage just like the 3-4s, that it's all about themselves. It's all about me. And a lot of times they shut down. They're not communicating with adults, usually communicating only with their peers. And you need to build that communication in the classroom. What will you do? What's some things that you can do in your classroom environment that will support this language development and this continuous growth?
Like words of the week and stuff like that.
Perfect, because you want to raise that critical thinking and vocabulary. So you do an activity that the words of the week and everything they say, do, or incorporate that word in. What's another thing you could do? Building their language. How about just group work? Cooperative learning. You assign them roles, so they must all speak and talk to each other. You're going to have some very shy kids, but you usually break down that shyness when they're working with their peers and in smaller groups. That's why New York State came up with the reading, writing, listening, speaking component to the standards, because they felt that so much of our language and so much of our learning was taken away with the lack of speaking and writing and listening. So you have them write something, and then you have them present it. You have them do projects. You let them use the media, technology, to talk about and present, and you build those skills. And then, at every age, I like the last box, listen and show your pleasure when the child talks to you. Now again, that goes through, remember when we talked about the self-esteem and failure? You don't want to be the teacher that everything the child says, or a parent, that everything the child, you get all excited about, oh my God, that was really wonderful. You want them to know that it's really positive that they're communicating with you, but you don't go overboard. You reinforce the fact that it was really a nice way that you made that compliment. You give them modeling so that they give the cool and warm feedback to their peers. You carry on constant conversations with your students, with all the children around you. You ask questions, but the questions and how you word your questions should be thoughtful, critical thinking questions. You don't just say, how was your day today? Because what do you got? Good. You start eliminating some of those basic words. Did you ever have a teacher that put up the chart that said can't use these words in the classroom? Just I was like, what were the words that you put on that elimination chart?
Like good.
Like good,
or
fine, okay, nice. Why do you think the teacher, they were trying to be mean, why do you think they had elimination words?
So you can have better
They
word
were trying to
choices.
expand our vocabulary.
Exactly. Because when students write, they typically try to write some basic vocabulary. If they're writing a response, they usually use basic words. If you choose to eliminate those basic words, you're searching their knowledge so that you give them other alternatives that they have to use instead. And that's where like the word of the week comes in. How many times can you use whatever this word of the week is? All right, so you think about the words, you think about the meaning. The next page, we go into the grammar and syntax. And we know when young children start talking, It's typical errors that they make. It's typical errors that they say, her go there, or me want this. That's typical because they're learning sentence pattern and syntax and grammar. And our English language is so difficult. We have so many irregular verbs. We have so many irregular patterns. So again, sometimes they get to the point that it's over-exaggeration, but you have to be the model to reinforce. So if they say, her go with me, you said, oh, she went along with you? So you model it back. You don't say, no, that's wrong. You model it back. So then eventually they pick it up and they model it back. Then you practice social situations. You actually set up groups in your classroom. Early in preschool, a lot of the modeling that happens is usually over toys. The fight's over toys because they're both about me. It's mine. I had it first. That's where fights begin, right? The best way to solve that is not by taking them both away. It's to work through the problem solving. Now, how can we solve this problem together? And you sit down and talk to them. How about if they play for 5 minutes with it, then you take it for 5 minutes? How about if we play together? So you talk about how to solve that problem rather than separating them and making it a definitive. The key part to this chapter is the emergent literacy. And when we talk about emergent literacy, as a teacher, you're going to notice that your students will be in all different phases with their literacy. Emergent means that they're already acquainted with the use of language and writing. And so there's an example here in this figure, a story and a grocery list. Usually when students start story writing early on, what do they use? If you give them a sheet of paper and they draw a picture and they're writing a story, how do they write their first story? What do they know about language at that time if they're going to write their own story? I wish I would have brought, my grandson did it last night. He took little index cards and he says, Grandma, I'm writing a story. And he took a pen and he's scribbling lines across, and he has, the letters he knows, but then he's scribbling lines, and he had them, really tiny lines, and he had them all across, and he goes, see, this is my story. I said, what a good job you did. Tell me what your story is about. Can he read those squiggly lines? But in his mind, he knew what he wanted to write. He said, I can't tell you what the story is. I'm writing it now. I said, okay. But you're letting me know when the story's done, and then we'll read it. But they know that early on, letters, symbols create words, which gives meaning, which tells what we're thinking and speaking, and it's on paper. So early story writing looks like symbols, looks like individual letters, looks like pictures. Do you know what that's called when you write stories using pictures? I would always say to my young writers, they get frustrated, but I want to know how to spell the word. How many times have you heard kids say that? Well, just tell me how it's spelled. And I say, think about it. What does it begin with? Like if it's say if it's a kindergarten first grader who knows letters and sounds. But if it's not, I'll say just draw a picture in its place. If they're writing a story about a cat, just draw the picture of the cat. So when you come to it, that's called rebus writing. Rebus writing is where you put a symbol or a picture in its place. So it doesn't stop the thinking. Even early on in first grade, emergent writers, they're thinking of a word they really want to write, but they don't know how to spell it. And they get stuck. So then it stops the flow of their thinking in the story. So I always say, put a symbol there. Put a picture for what you're thinking. And it lets them go on and keep writing. So that's an emergent skill that you will see with early on with children starting to write. You will also see, like in this picture, they're writing with capitals. That's a huge skill for a young writer. What do you see as the symbol in there with capital letters in the story? Can you read that sentence? Read the sentence out loud. Are all those words spelled correctly? Then how did you know how to read it? You did, but what did the child do to show you what they were thinking? through an airplane, and the words are pretty close proximity. He knew some of the sounds in the words that they wanted to say. And if you look carefully, the sentence begins with a capital. The word mommy is capitalized, which means, what's the understanding that he has about mommy?
Mommy's important.
Mommy's important, and mommy's a name. Something else was capitalized in that sentence. Liberty Bell. What did he know or she know about Liberty Bell? It's an important place. It's a proper noun. Now, do you think this child knows what proper nouns are? Do you think this child knows what capitalization is at the beginning of a sentence? Probably not. Where did this child get this pattern from this early sentence? Reading, the exposure, the environment, the teacher, the parents. So these are the emergent skills that we talk about when you're a teacher that you start seeing. There's a lot of skills going on in this sentence. Now, did you know about those early skills before we read this sentence? You just read the sentence and you say, oh, that's really poorly written. But think of the amount of language and skills that it took to write that sentence. Okay, look at the grocery list. Read what's on the grocery list.
It was list of fruit.
It's a list of fruit.
Tomatoes,
Yeah,
onions, apples, and pears.
and pears. Those aren't spelled correctly. How'd you know that? Yeah, the symbols and the letters and the sounds that they put together. Whose list is it? Yeah, Kayla's list. Look at how Kayla's written. All capital letters.
Isn't it true though, like if the letters, the first letter and the last letter are the same, it doesn't matter how the first letter? You understood that?
Yes. Yes. Our brains are so wired, only because we have so much vocabulary in our heads, that if the first and the last letter are there, you usually know what the word is. I used to do a reading seminar for parents of early children, and I gave them books to read that had nothing like letters. It was all symbols. And they had pictures, but it was all symbols and sentences. And I taught them what the symbol meant. Like if you see a triangle, it meant a certain letter. If you so they were all symbols. At first, when they started to read it, they were very, very frustrated. Why?
You gotta pair the two together and really think about what you're doing.
Right. Your brain has to integrate your prior knowledge to what you really know. Prior knowledge is letters mean words, and these are the words that I know, and these are the letters that spelled correctly. Think about children with ESL. They learn their own language. They're spelling and writing their own language. And they come here, and we're teaching everything in English. Most other languages are nowhere near the same symbols as English. And I won't give it away, but when I scored some of yours that watched the video already, it was a clear-cut reaction. So the assignment, I'm not going to give it away. We'll talk about it on Thursday. The video that's posted for this chapter, it shows that kind of learning. And it's a personal reaction to it. So I'm not going to go into it. Okay, so let's go to the next page about the components of emergent literacy. How many remember learning those lessons of sounding out every letter? Remember that? How many were frustrated by sounding out all those letters and learning to read that way? All of you do not learn by sounding out letters. All children do not learn by sounding out letters. We have to have alternatives in our instruction to help children. All children don't know the sounds of the alphabet and the letters and putting them together to make words. And then sometimes teachers drove the sound out of the words, but the worst thing it sounded like is every sentence and every word that a child who is struggling comes to, they read, especially like unusual words like the. Can you sound out the? No. What's some other words you can't sound out? Think of words we use all the time. You can't sound them out if you're trying to teach them. Of. Does it sound like that? Mm-mm. We have so many exceptions in our English language. And you say to them, well, just sound it out. If they don't know the sounds and they're trying to put the sounds in place and then they're irregular, it doesn't even make sense. The key to reading is comprehension. The key is understanding what the print means. And if you're telling them to sound out every word, are they getting comprehension? No. All they're reading is the what comprehension is that? Right? Do you remember doing that? And you get to the end of the sentence, you have no idea what you read. Because you were just sounding out the words all along, right? So think about that as teachers. If I gave you very difficult vocabulary and said, just sound it out, what would you do? Think of a technical book. Think of you reading physics or chemistry, and you're sounding out that vocabulary. Look at Sam like, ah. If I gave you a very difficult book to read, and it was academic language beyond our levels, we don't know anything about it. That's what young readers see in front of them. And you can't possibly learn that language by sounding it out. So, I'm going to do one last thing. So, I want you to look at the components of emergent literacy for Thursday. There's an outside in and inside out. The outside in process means exactly what it says. Outside means environment. It comes from the environment and then it comes in. The inside out, it comes from inside and it's out, spoken outside. And we're going to talk about how that's relevant in school. So I brought along, because on the next page, and I want you to pay attention to this, because it was against my religion that I actually made copies. But I was going to post. This is academic language functions, and I brought you academic language function toolkit. Because as teachers, and I hate to use this again, but on the EdTPA and your certification, you're going to be asked about academic language. So I want you to think right now, think fair share. Come up with what you think the definition of academic language is. Some of you have read it, but come up with what you think the meaning of academic language is and how that's important for us as teachers. Okay, what do you think academic language is?
Speaking critically.
It is. There's a little bit more to than just speaking correctly. That's a good start.
Speaking in a way that your students understand.
Speaking, that's another part of it. Speaking in a way that your students do understand what you're teaching. What else? What would academic language mean to you? Right. Vocabulary and language we use in the classroom. What's some some specific academic language that we use here in this class that you probably don't use in other classes? Sam?
Like how we discuss about like different terminology towards the psychology in like early childhood and adolescent childhood and like the brain development and every stage that they go through.
Perfect. So if you went into your math class and you used the terminology, the academic language that we're using here to describe brain functions and academic learning, would they understand that?
No, because math is different from this class.
Okay, so academic language for math sounds like what? Numbers and formulas, right? Problem solving strategy. So academic language has to do with the pertinent academic language that we need to be successful in whatever arena academically that you are. So young children in classrooms have to have certain academic words to know, to learn along the way. So in a first grade classroom, what do you think some of the academic language words are that they need to understand in order to be successful with learning? We sometimes refer to them as school words. What do you think a first grader would need to know in a classroom? A word that would be related to school.
Like could or would, like those kind of, like just slightly upper, more than 3 letters in the upper range of.
Right,
They're longer
vocabulary words. Good. What's some environmental academic language that they know in school but maybe they've never used at home? In a classroom.
Maybe like safety procedures.
Safety, right?
Like adding, subtracting.
Right, the terminology for all of the language that they're learning. Just book, turning, pages, even the furniture in the classroom. Desk, chairs, that's not a formula. Bus, that's not something that is part of their home life, is it? So think of those academic words that you're teaching in whatever content area that you will be teaching. If it's English, you're going to be talking about grammar and punctuation and paragraphs and syntax and different terminology for whatever literature you're reading. That's academic language. You as pre-teachers are learning the academic language right now of the research for education, the theories. Special education, think of the academic language you're learning there. The categories, the handicapping, we talked about different, right? That's a huge amount of academic language. Give yourself credit for all of this academic language that you're learning in this one semester right now in college that you've never learned before. Can you think of one thing that you learned through this semester that you never knew before you started? Jackie.
I can't even pronounce it.
Cognitive,
Yes, thinking.
cognitive thinking. So that opens you up to a whole new avenue of what it is that you never had before this class. So the academic function chart here, now this is something you should hang on to because it's something that you will use in your lesson planning, you will learn along the way in all your other courses, and yes, it's on the EdTPA. You must be familiar with these terms. The academic function in the classroom means if you're seeking information, the student language that you want to use, instead of saying to your students, we're going to seek information today. What are the words that we use that mean seeking information? Learn. And if you look on the chart, they also use observe, explore, acquire, inquire. Those are words that mean you're seeking knowledge. So you teach that terminology to them. You give them examples. And the thinking map is the same thing, thinking map and graphic organizers, as a visual representative to help them understand. So if they're seeking information, they create a circle map. How many are familiar with what a circle map is? No? Never used circle maps with, did you, Shmai? Yes. What's a circle map? Pardon me?
Like the norm, the normal
Yes, it's like a Venn diagram, but a circle map is to perpetrate that when we're seeking information about something, we start at the top with whatever the topic is, and the circle map is you create things around, all the way around, to draw back to the top of the knowledge of the word, or, right. And so another way to do that is with a graphic organizer. A web, SQ3R. Do you know what an SQ3R is? Have you used SQ? No? Ooh, we're going to learn all of this academic language so you're familiar with it. Outlines, Cornell note-taking. You might have learned different note-taking strategies, okay? That's how you seek and acquire information. And so each one of these academic language functions we're going to talk about: inform, compare, order, classify, analyze, justify, persuade, solve problems, synthesize, and evaluate. What chart did we do earlier on, and my other class uses it now all the time, that used this vocabulary in it? We were thinking about higher order thinking skills. Think of the triangle. Who is the researcher that says we always start with knowledge, and in order to acquire our knowledge, we work up to application level? Who is it? Sarita? Bloom's. Bloom's taxonomy. So these words are functions that we use academically in Bloom's. Now this toolkit is a sample from a high school, actually, and it's a resource for kids, but it's also for teachers to help them with the academic language. Informal language and academic language. There's a nice comparison chart here. That's how you teach replacing slang in the classroom. That's how you teach replacing texting acronyms in the classroom. I would always say to my students, there's words that are appropriate that you use at home, but these are school language. We use only in school. Especially when kids swear in school. That's a home language. We don't use that in school. But each one of these gives you the same academic functions along the way, the toolkit, with the words and vocabulary that students need to know and you need to know. So hang on to these. We're going to use these on Thursday. I'm going to pass around the sign-up sheet now. You want me to, I don't know if you want me to split the sheet or you want to come up. The first sheet is December 1st, 3rd, and 8th, and then December 10th and 17th for your presentation. If you want one of the earlier dates, come up and sign the sheet. And please put your topic next to your name.
Put a sign up for a date. Do we
To-
switch it if we need to?
Yes, I just want to get, yes,
I'm not 100% sure now, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really
okay,
I'm gonna sign up for one.
okay. And if you're working with a partner, make sure that, the two partner names are on there.